Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something, well, pretty neat in the low-cost computing world. It just sits there on your desk, looks like a keyboard, really clean, compact. But hidden inside, there's actually a surprisingly capable little machine, the Raspberry Pi 500 Basic Kit.
Yeah, it's a real shift in the form factor, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
for years, Raspberry Pi was the go-to for tinkerers, for learning, building stuff. But, getting started often meant hunting down all the bits and pieces, the power supply, SD card, case, keyboard.
Right, the whole scavenger hunt.
Exactly. The Pi 500 just cuts through all that, puts the whole computer inside the keyboard shell. Simple.
So our mission today is to really deep dive into this thing. We want to unpack the thinking behind this design, check out the performance they've managed to cram in there, and figure out how accessible it really is, not just for people who already know Pi, but for you. Maybe you're curious, want to start coding or build your first project.
It's kind of brilliant, actually. It addresses a need that maybe the community didn't even fully realize it had until it showed up. It's affordable, solves that whole cable mess problem, but still keeps the flexibility that made the original Pi board so popular.
Okay, let's start with how it looks, because that's the first thing you notice. It just cleans up the desk, this slim, light little keyboard housing everything. That alone is a huge plus, especially for like students or small workspaces.
Yeah, it kind of achieves what those old all-in-one desktops were aiming for, but, way smaller and way cheaper. The keyboard is the computer. And the basic kit, specifically, is designed to get you running really fast.
Right, let's focus on that basic kit for a second. What exactly comes in the box that smooths out that setup process? Because it's more than just the keyboard computer thingy.
That's key, yeah. The basic kit removes the guesswork. So obviously you get the Pi 500 unit itself, integrated, and crucially you get that proper 27-watt USB-C power supply. That's important for the beefier internals. It also includes an HDMI to micro HDMI cable, which you'll need. And for the tinkerers, they've thrown in the GPIO adapter board too.
That power supply, that's a big deal. We've all been there, right? Trying to run an older Pi off some random phone charger and wondering why it keeps crashing.
Oh yeah,
So this 27-watt unit shows they're serious about stability.
absolutely. And then there's the keyboard itself. The sources suggest it feels pretty decent. Look, it's not a fancy mechanical keyboard, but it's comfortable enough for actual typing coding sessions. It doesn't feel, cheap or flimsy, which you might expect.
That build quality matters, especially if people are taking it to classrooms or coding clubs, moving it around, and the setup really underlines that beginner friendliness. Plug in power, plug the cable into a monitor, add a mouse, and that's basically it.
That's basically it. You skip all those potentially intimidating steps like finding a case, figuring out cooling, sourcing all the components.
Which, when you think about it from a learning perspective, is huge. If you're trying to introduce someone to coding or computers, the fewer roadblocks, the better, right? Get them doing the fun stuff faster.
Exactly. The Pi 500 is like an invitation to start doing, not just fiddling with hardware assembly first.
Okay, let's shift gears. Let's talk about the engine room. It's small, but it calls itself a computer. What kind of performance are we actually talking about here? Because packing a capable chip into a passively cooled keyboard, well, it raises questions about heat and power.
That's the core challenge of the design, isn't it? How much power can you fit without needing a fan? The Pi 500 uses the same basic silicon as the Raspberry Pi 5.
Okay.
So we're talking the quad-core 64-bit Broadcom BCM 2712 processor. It's a massive leap from older Pis. It handles everyday stuff, web browsing, office docs, playing media really smoothly, much more responsive than previous generations.
Smooth is good, but what about the cooling? If you push it, like compiling code or running a heavy web app, does it start to throttle back performance because of heat? Is that the trade-off?
That's a fair question. Unlike the standalone Pi 5, where you'd often add a fan for heavy use, the Pi 500 is all passive. It uses a big internal heat spreader connected to the case. So yes, if you run really intense, non-stop benchmarks, you will see it throttle compared to a Pi 5 with active cooling. But for probably 95% of typical use coding, browsing, light development work, the sources say it stays cool enough and doesn't throttle much during normal tasks. It's really optimized for that consistent everyday workload, not like extreme number crunching.
Okay, that makes sense. Sets the right expectation. It's a great performer for what it is and for its thermal design. But here's the bit that seems to surprise everyone, the real aha moment.
Right.
The display output. How on earth do they manage dual 4K support in this thing?
Right. That's where the newer architecture, especially that RP1 I/O controller chip, really shows its stuff. This RP1 chip handles all the input-output freeing up the main processor, and allows those two micro HDMI ports on the back to drive two separate 4K displays. Now, it's at 30 frames per second at 4K, or you can do lower resolutions at higher refresh rates.
Wow, dual 4K. So I could have like my code editor on one big 4K screen and maybe documentation or Slack on another 4K screen,
Right.
all powered by the keyboard.
Pretty much.
That feels like it shifts it from just a hobbyist device to a genuinely useful budget productivity setup.
Totally. For multitasking, for actual work, that screen real estate is gold.
Yeah.
Now, it's not meant for, say, intense 4K gaming or heavy video editing that would push the GPU and probably hit those heat limits we talked about. But for general productivity, maybe some data analysis, coding, anything where you need multiple windows open, it's surprisingly capable. It gives you serious desktop flexibility in this tiny package.
That flexibility is a game changer. Okay, but a computer needs to connect to things. Let's talk connectivity. Given how slim it is, how are the ports? What are we working with?
They've managed to fit a decent selection around the back, actually. You get the standard wireless stuff built in, dual-band Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 5.0.
Yeah.
So getting online, connecting a wireless mouse or keyboard, that's easy. Then physically, you've got two USB 3.0 ports and two USB 2.0 ports.
Having those faster USB 3.0 ports is good for external drives or faster peripherals.
Yeah, definitely. Means moving large files around isn't such a drag anymore. But maybe the most critical connection for the traditional Pi audience is the GPIO expansion.
Okay, let's pause there. We've mentioned GPIO. For someone totally new listening, what is GPIO and why is that adapter board they include so important?
Good question. Think of them as like tiny programmable switches or sensors on the Pi. They let the computer interact with the physical world. You can connect to LEDs, buttons, sensors, motors, all sorts of electronic components, and then control them with code. It's the heart of making physical computing projects, robotics, that kind of thing.
Ah, okay, so it's the bridge from digital code to physical stuff happening.
Exactly. And because the main Pi board is sealed inside the keyboard, you can't access those pins directly anymore. So they include this adapter board. It plugs into a slot on the back and brings those GPIO pins out neatly so you can still connect all your electronics projects without having to, crack open the case.
I get it. So the Pi 500 makes things super easy for someone who just wants to plug it in and code.
Right.
But it doesn't sacrifice that core hackability for people who want to build physical things. The adapter keeps that door open.
Precisely. And that balance makes it really great for education, like coding clubs or classrooms, or just for a hobbyist who wants a powerful setup for prototyping, but wants it to be tidy,
Yeah.
less mess on the desk. The tidiness might actually help learning, fewer distractions.
It really does feel like a complete package for experimenting and learning packed into something incredibly small.
And it runs Raspberry Pi OS, which is really polished now, optimized for the hardware. So the whole experience feels pretty smooth and robust for those everyday tasks.
Okay, so wrapping things up, synthesizing all this. The overall take on the Raspberry Pi 500 basic kit seems really positive. It feels like a very smart, strategic step forward. It strikes this excellent balance between being easy for newcomers and still powerful enough for experienced users.
Yeah, putting the computer inside the keyboard. It solves real practical problems, but keeps that essential Pi flexibility. It's just clean, clever, and honestly kind of fun to use for computing or building projects.
The convenience is probably its biggest selling point. No assembly required. You can just jump straight into learning or making something minutes after opening the box.
Definitely. And look, nobody's saying this kit replaces a high-end workstation, right?
Yeah.
But it really does make you question if you need that $2,000 machine for a lot of the stuff people do, learning, basic productivity, web stuff.
Which leads us perfectly into our final thought for you to mull over. The Pi 500 basic kit shows you can get serious multitasking, even driving two 4K screens, out of something that costs very little and fits inside a keyboard.
So think about this. If your computer setup prioritized adaptability, low energy use, and learning, instead of just raw, expensive speed, what limitations of your current setup maybe don't seem so limiting anymore?
Yeah, how does the usual size and cost of a typical desktop or laptop start to feel maybe a bit excessive when you see what clever engineering can pack into this little keyboard? Just something to think about, that balance between sheer power versus purposeful design.